Hi everyone and welcome back to PDA UK. In this episode, I'm going to be interviewing Helen Evans and Juila Daunt from the PDA Society. And as you know, I've recently become an ambassador for the PDA Society. So this is a chance to catch up with the CEO and people who are working behind the scenes at the PDA Society and find out what's really going on. So as I say, welcome back to PDA UK. Before I go on, please do go hit like, hit subscribe and ring the bell. You'll always know when new content is coming up, and it makes a big difference to how all this information gets out there and the people that get to hear it. It's a big favor. Please go do it. I'm also going to give a quick plug to the merchandise that we've got. Please do head over. The link will be in the description. All proceeds from the sales of any merchandise are going directly to the PDA Society. So please do get behind that and give it a go. As I say, I'm speaking to Juila Daunt and to Helen Evans from the PDA Society. And we're going to talk a bit about their lives, a bit about what's inspired them and what's going on. So welcome, Julia, and welcome, Helen. How are you guys doing?
Yeah, good,
Fine,
thank you.
Fantastic. So I guess I'll start with you, Helen. You are the CEO now of the PDA Society. When did that occur? When did that happen?
I joined summer last year, so coming up for about 9 months. I'm the first CEO of the PDA Society, so it's been a real privilege to join.
And my understanding is that the PDA Society themselves made a very conscious decision that they wanted to engage neurodivergent people in the process of running the PDA Society and the people behind the scenes. And you are autistic yourself, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So I was diagnosed a couple of years ago. I look back and I think, how did I not realise I was obviously autistic? And it took my son getting diagnosed to sort of open up my eyes. And as I was going through the assessment with him, I was like, hang on, this is all very, very familiar. And a bit of that kind of like, all right, yeah, no, pretty certain I'm autistic as well.
I hear that a lot. A lot of people. So I run that group on Facebook, which is for parents of autistic kids, and you hear so many of the people on there saying that same sort of thing. I'd never thought about it until my daughter got diagnosed, and I was suddenly thinking, geez, this sounds familiar. And they go down the rabbit hole. My wife did the same. I talked about it on here before, but there was that whole process. She just took the online test, but took a few of them. And I always liken it to, there's a moment in The Simpsons where Homer goes for a loan and the sirens all start going off. And it was like, you are autistic. Yes, you are. And it was all of them were going, okay, I think I might have to accept that I'm neurodivergent here. So, what was that process like for you getting diagnosed as an adult?
Oh, gosh. I felt really nervous. Nervous at them saying I wasn't. I was thinking maybe I got this wrong, that kind of like fear of having misunderstood yourself, and also nervous at getting a diagnosis, because then that has given me a lot of pause for thought about my life and understanding it in a different way. And then when I ultimately got it, it was a relief. It was just, to have somebody else to confirm that officially was, for me, it was what I needed then to have that permission to start having those conversations with other people. And everyone's different. For some people, that self-identification is enough. For me, I did need that to then go forward and start talking to people about it. And I was really worried about how people would respond. And I remember the first time I told someone, it was my neighbour. Yeah, I didn't know what they were going to do, and they were lovely. They were really nice. And yeah, and it's been really, really helpful, because I now understand so much of my past a lot better, but also understand my own needs. And I'm getting much better at kind of sharing those with other people and making them aware as well.
That's really interesting, because I think there's that element there, isn't it? It can be a double-edged sword in a way. I think for some people it's like, well, now I'm going to get pigeonholed or labeled. But I think it also, when you start to understand these things, it sheds a light on why certain things are the way they are. I have a good friend who's my best man, who's been late diagnosed ADHD. And for him, it was so much makes sense now. And it's really made such a difference to me knowing this and being able to move on. Julia, you are also neurodivergent yourself. What are your diagnoses?
PDA ADHD.
PDA ADHD. So a PDA yourself with the PDA Society.
Yeah.
Was that part of the reason for getting involved?
Yeah, and it's going to sound corny, but wanted to make a difference.
Not corny at all.
It's my you know, particularly during lockdown, because obviously conferences stopped and face-to-face training stopped. I'm not keen to get back into that because I'm still a bit nervous about, you know, going back out there. I've got used to doing it at home now. And the training through the PDA Society fills that gap really well and means I'm still able to help people and raise awareness.
While also taking care of your own needs in amongst all.
Yes, yeah.
We talked about it on the Grumpy Gits quite a bit, this idea that it's sad that it took a pandemic to... the requirements for people with, you know, additional needs when it comes to employment or schooling or anything like that were always there or have been there for a long time, but it took a pandemic to make them mainstream, if you like.
Yeah.
And it's only then that it was like, you know, you have to be at work, you have to be in an office. And then it was like, well, actually, no, you don't. We can work around it this way now. And it took the pandemic to almost bring that out. It's like one of the few real positives, I think, that came out of the whole situation. But it really put, I think, for a lot of disabled people in general, put a much bigger perspective. You can work around these things and you can have these people working in your companies because there are ways to work this. How do you find living with PDA on a daily basis, especially when it comes to things like work and deadlines and needs? Because PDA, what's it like for you?
Well, my work is very limited. I only do maybe a couple of training sessions a month. So that's probably about 8 hours max a month, which is more than enough for me to keep on top of. But daily stuff, I have lots of help from my partner Paul with things like washing and dressing and sending invoices, making sure I've replied to emails and things, partly because of the ADHD. If I don't do it now, I forget. Yeah. And I think I've replied, and then 2 weeks later someone sends me another email and I'm like, oh, sorry, I didn't reply, did I? I forgot that. And making sure that I write things in my diary, because I did early on with my PDA Society training, I had a surprise event because I forgot to write it in my diary. And the night before, the lady I trained with sent me a message and said, you know, you ready for tomorrow? And I was like, what? What? So I pretended. I said, oh, yes, I'm ready. Yes. I'm like, no, help. So I had to go back through my emails to find what I'd agreed to. And so since then, I've been really good at writing it in the diary because that came as a sort of moment. I handled it well, I thought. I couldn't, and she still doesn't know. She'll know now because I've just said it. So she knows now. But hopefully no one noticed. As far as I know, they didn't. But yeah, I have an awful lot of help with even the really basic things. So like if I have a shower, Paul's in the room with me. You know, he helps find my clothes to put on after, all sorts of little things that you wouldn't even necessarily think about. Yeah, a lot of micromanaging goes on, and it's my job to sort of space my diary because obviously only I know how I feel on a Monday. So obviously yesterday I knew today was coming up, and I've got an appointment tomorrow that I know I won't be able to attend. So that's been cancelled because I wasn't feeling particularly good yesterday, anxiety-wise. So I knew I wouldn't be able to do both. So I picked the important one and cancelled the other one. For me, I need to have a day or two between each thing. And it's just the way the diary fell. It just didn't work out. And plus the snooker's on. So, yeah, no, I'm sadly a big snooker fan.
You talked there about the anxiety, and I find that something that PDA and anxiety, and I think autism and anxiety is so intrinsically interlinked.
Yeah.
You know, and you spoke there about the fact that you've got that. You've learned to manage your anxieties by balancing your diary, in a sense.
And balancing what I do around the house. So we have an unusual way of tidying up because Paul, I don't mean to list his negatives, but he's very, he gets overwhelmed easily. So if you confront him with a room that's messy, his brain will just go, oh my God, it's messy.
Yeah.
And he won't know where to start. Whereas because I'm very controlling, my brain looks at it and goes, right, you start here, you start there, you start here, you know. But obviously because of demand avoidance, I can't actually do it myself. So I direct him where to take stuff in the house. So I say, well, that goes upstairs, that goes in the bin, that needs to go into the garage, and so that's how we tidy up. So we work as a team, and that works well because it annoys me, because I'll sit there and I'll look at it and I know exactly what I need to do it, and I have the ability to do it, but I just can't do it, and that really winds me up. So having someone who isn't very good at that is good, because obviously if I was trying to direct somebody who could do it themselves, they would end up getting quite annoyed at, like, look, you're teaching your grandmother to suck eggs, can you stop? Whereas because Paul lacks that skill, it works quite well.
I think that's the key, isn't it? And I think what you're also highlighting there is something really important, is that you are a team in any relationship, and working together, you find those links between your strengths and weaknesses can be, they match in a sense, it's opposites attract, maybe, that kind of thing. Maybe that's a reason for it. What about for you, Helen? I mean, when you come to your day-to-day, how do you balance, I guess, managing the autistic side of your being with the responsibilities that are presented to you with what's a pretty important position?
Oh gosh, I think there's been a lot of learning along the way, and sometimes getting it really wrong. and now I'm in my 40s, and it's working better. I think when I first started out in work, I was working in the private sector in a really busy, noisy office, and I changed jobs every, if I could get to 2 years, that was great. But by that point, then I'd often crash and burn, just exhausted, and not realizing that for me, actually, what works best, homeworking. Homework before the pandemic, and having just that quiet where, I might be doing back-to-back Zooms, but then I've just got that quiet space. There's not all the chitter-chatter around me. I can sit here with my curtains drawn in my chair at my desk, and I have a lot more control over my environment, which I really, really need. And the other thing is, I find roles where I've got more control over them, where leadership roles really suit me. And with smaller organisations where I can get to know people and build those personal relationships, but also being much more mindful of when I need to pause a bit. So one of the things I will do is hyper-focus. I can sit at my desk and work for a very long period of time. And I used to just not think about, well, maybe I should step away. I've been sat down here for like 4 hours. And now I'm much more conscious about going for walks, taking that break. And I'd say my son was just fabulous at getting me to, pause and stop, because I have to for him, and so that's been really healthy, actually learning with him.
And I mean, you say that about the hyper focus. It's one of those things, I've spoken about it before, because I find it, being a neurotypical, I find a lot of this fascinating from that. I just wish I could do some of these things myself. Hyperfocus is one of those things, that ability. I have a very good friend who makes sure, she actually did this ear spacer thing. But she does this amazing jewelry and stuff like that. But she has this ability to it's her hyperfocus. And she knows how to vary it enough that it remains a hyperfocus and it doesn't just wear out. But the stuff she creates, and this ability to hone in and focus, I mean, that must be a real advantage in many ways. But like you're saying, also the potential for burnout must be huge from that.
Yeah, it's like a double-edged sword. So you will forget to eat or drink or go to the loo, like real basics just don't occur to me. And then I can get a bit disgruntled if someone interrupts me when I'm in the zone. I'm like, don't want to be interrupted. But the flip side is, when you find that synergy of doing, I think it's that sweet spot where the work you're doing aligns with your interests, my special interests. And then when that happens, that feels really good and you really enjoy it. And then you can really move things along. But the things I've learned as well is I'm not working in isolation, and I've got to be really mindful as well at working collaboratively with my colleagues. And early on in my career, I think it was probably quite tough for some of my colleagues working with me, because I'd be like, well, haven't you done this? I've done this, I'm ready. So there's a lot that hasn't come natural to me that I've really had to learn. And I think that's the thing, being autistic, none of the social side is intuitive. I've had to learn chit chat. I would not do it. When I was a kid, I'd just come up to you and just talk at you, and there would be no social cue that I'd take that you might be bored of me talking at you. So over the years, I've really had to learn it, and I still have to be very mindful of it. And in social situations, I'm always consciously thinking how other people are experiencing this. And there's that balance between being authentic and being my authentic self, but also it matters to me how the people I'm engaging with are feeling and experiencing that. And if I've bored them to tears, I want to know that. I pause a bit before I go off on.
I really respect that. There's that sense there that it's, you're not entirely self-focused with it, but you know to look after yourself with it at the same time. And I think that often gets missed on both sides of the conversation, if you like. Understanding from people that there are people with different neurodivergencies out there, and we need to not only accept that but understand that and work with that and be positive towards it. But there's the other side as well, which you're being aware, especially in a position like you're in, having to that. Does that become exhausting? Because I'd see it as a form of masking almost.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think definitely as a teenager, I masked. I was very conscious. So I had no friends at primary school, and I made one friend at secondary who's now actually got a diagnosis herself. It's really interesting how we gravitated towards each other. And I was consciously masking day in, day out because I felt that was the only way to make friends and get on. As I've got older, I'm much more comfortable being more open and my authentic self. But it's also I'm mindful of other people's experiences. So I guess I feel it's less masking, it's just I've got more of awareness, but because I need to do that in a very cognizant way, because it's not intuitive, that can be draining. So like Julia, when I'm in work, I don't find that tiring. I find that energizing as long as I'm taking the breaks, going for walks, eating healthy. Social situations, I enjoy them, but I find them emotionally exhausting. So I'm really conscious about pacing those out in the week. And what I used to do was say yes to things, do too many things, and then come up with reasons why I couldn't. I'll be like, oh, I've got a cold or something's happened. Now I spread those things out and I'm honest with people. And I say, actually, I've just done too much this week, so I can't. And I'm really sorry. I'd love to be there. It's not I don't want to, I just can't today. Yeah. So I'm much more open about that. But that's come with time. And along the way, I've upset people, lost friends because they're like, why are you always cancelling last minute? Why didn't you show up? This was really important to me. And I didn't have an understanding of myself to know what the reasons really were and to be able to articulate those. And that's sad. And that's why I'm so passionate about everyone should have that right to know who they are early on. So when I was growing up, I never met an autistic woman. I just didn't, all I had was a stereotype view of autistic people and autistic boys in particular. And because of that and that lack of experience, I went undiagnosed, and that presented many challenges. I was out of school for 18 months. It wasn't an easy ride growing up. And it's the same with PDA. Everybody should have that right to know who they are. And it shouldn't be the postcode lottery that it is right now as to whether or not a clinician will identify a PDA profile. I feel that's really wrong. Something I'm passionate about changing.
We'll get into that in a bit more detail in a bit. But I think that resonates really truly with me. The fact that where I am, they don't diagnose PDA. We had to fight to even get an autistic diagnosis. And once we got that, it was like, oh yeah, this is very obvious. Everyone else who was working with my daughter knew, but it was trying to get that. But what we managed to do is get it that they note that PDA strategies will be effective in managing my daughter's challenges, which was great. And it's great. That's the closest we're going to get in this area to a PDA diagnosis. It's part of the reason I approached you guys in the first place when it's that I call it the blueprint moment that so many people go through, and you see the list of traits for PDA and you go, that's it. That's you just read my mind, because that is exactly what I'm dealing with. And being able to approach you guys for the advice early on and actually be able to set myself up in a direction and know where I needed to go to get the right support and things in place, which is still a battle. But I think that identifying and I see that with my daughter. My daughter's going through this stage at the moment where she's she's proud of her being autistic while also despising it and hating it for various reasons, because she's understanding that it does come with complications and challenges and the anxieties. She's very vocal about her anxieties at the moment, which is, I'm glad she's vocal about them, but it's, that's still where it goes. But being able to identify and I liken it to a lot of what the LGBTQ plus community have gone through, in that sense of why are you forced to hide who you are to be accepted? That's wrong. And it's, it has come out in this. And I mean, Julia, you've very proudly associated yourself as being a PDAer. What was that process like for you coming into that understanding? When did you get diagnosed?
I was 12. I had both assessments done at fairly similar time. And there was, like Helen was saying, girls didn't have autism back then. It wasn't a thing. So there wasn't much in the way of support, certainly in education. So we had to kind of make things work that were already there. And also back then, PDA wasn't autism. It was just PDA. Its link hadn't been sort of confirmed or thought about or whatever. So my diagnosis is just PDA. Yeah. With autism sort of added later without, they just added it because it's just easier to just put it on there. I didn't really know too much about PDA, and we were told at the time that it was really rare and more common in boys. So I never bothered looking for support or anything, I think we were going through some old folders of reports from childhood, and I found all this PDA stuff, assessment reports. And I was like, oh. So I Googled it and then came across the PDA contact group. And I thought, so I joined that. And it was very good, but it was all parents. And I thought, well, this is it's nice, but I don't feel that the support is two-way. Because obviously I went on there and said, I'm an adult with PDA. So they all said, oh, with all their questions lined up. And I was like, oh, okay, it's fine. But I want to speak to someone else who does the things I do. So I started the Adult PDA Support Network on Facebook, and sat and waited. And it took quite a long time. And then eventually all these adults started joining, either identified as PDA or had diagnosis of PDA. I forget how many members we've got now, but it's thousands. And that's where my support really came from. So my light bulb moment, although I was diagnosed at 12, my light bulb moment didn't happen until I was about 26. So up until then, I was using PDA approaches, but without knowing I was.
Makes sense, doesn't it?
They're just things I'd learned to do to help myself. And in a weird way, the more I've learned about PDA, the worse my PDA has become. I don't know if that makes sense, but the more aware I am of it and the more conscious I am of my needs, the more help I need.
Is it that thing of, and feel free to completely go at me on this one if I'm on the wrong path completely. We recently got a new car, and we got let's just say it, nothing special, but it's a new car for us. I'd never realized how many Seats were on the road until I got one. And then suddenly you see them everywhere. And it's like, because my mind's become attuned to a brand, if you like, it suddenly pops up and I notice it more. Is it that element there that maybe these things have been there all along, but now that you're learning more about it, you're then more aware of it, and so you are then addressing the things that are associated?
I think so, because when I speak to my mum, she doesn't notice any difference between me then and me now.
Yeah.
If you see what I mean, and she would. Paul, it's hard to tell, because for the first 4 or 5 years of our relationship, I was masking mostly. So I was the perfect housewife, believe it or not, people. So I would, dinner was ready at 6 o'clock and the house was clean. And, I was like, I was perfect. And then it sort of all started to slip away. And now Paul does it all. But no, I did, when I call it, I came out on Facebook, but I put on Facebook, that I'm autistic, I have PDA. And I did lose friends over it. People were either just not comfortable with it or were angry that I didn't tell them before. But I gained more friends closer relationships with people that maybe I wasn't as close with. Suddenly they would message me and say, I'm, really proud that you've said that and that you've stood up and you've, accepted it.
You kind of find your tribe, don't you? I've heard this mentioned a lot. And I think, you were talking about the fact that Helen, that your friend at school, turns out that she was neurodivergent also. And I think there's a natural tendency to sort of group together at a totally subconscious level. With
my core PDA group, we are very defensive of each other, and we will, regardless of consequences, we will stand up for each other. Yeah. We don't think, we just, if we need to go into battle, we do. And it is nice. And it's also nice to be able to, like a few years ago, I had a problem because my old hairbrush was getting a bit manky. It needed replacing, but where I got it from had stopped making them. And it took me probably about £100 in hairbrushes to find one that felt the same. When I did, I posted up in the group that I finally found a hairbrush that doesn't feel like it's pulling my hair out by the roots and is magic. And it was nice to have other people say, oh, I've had that too with toothbrushes or socks or whatever. Whereas if I put that up on Facebook, everyone would be like, what are you on about?
Absolutely.
A hairbrush is a hairbrush. And it's like, oh.
That's great. And I love hearing things like that. And I mean, I think it comes back to that self-identity, doesn't it? And actually being able to be comfortable with the person you are inside, dropping the mask. I mean, for you, Helen, your association with PDA is your son, yeah?
That's right, yeah.
When did that come about? How did that process start for you?
Quite early on, probably aged around about 3, I could see that, he was, there was a difference there with his peers and that he was struggling to sort of, for us to understand his needs and he was needing to communicate those in a range of ways because he wasn't being heard that were causing distress. Spoke to a health visitor, got a referral to see a paediatrician. Took, though, quite a long time to come through. So with the support of my family, paid for a private assessment, which I'm conscious not everybody can do, but my family very kindly supported with that. And he was diagnosed as autistic and ADHD. So I kind of read up, I did all the things that I thought would be helpful. And a lot of those, looking back at the things that I like, official timetables, being really direct, focused on routine, totally inflexible. If we have a plan, we stick to the plan. And poor thing, he just absolutely, that was not what he needed. And he was increasingly feeling distressed by that. And school were internally excluding him. And we weren't in a great place.
Yeah.
But I'd been advised to stay on the NHS pathway. And we eventually got the appointment with the paediatrician, had the multidisciplinary team assessment. And it was a locum who said, I think your son is atypical. And have you heard about PDA? And have you visited the PDA Society website? And so what you do, get on your phone immediately. And I just read it and it was just like, yes, this absolutely now makes sense. And it was just such a relief and so wonderful to feel like for the first time I understood my son, because I hadn't. I just wasn't understanding his needs. And as a parent, you're desperate. You want to, I could see how hard it was for him and I felt so powerless. So having someone give me like that key to unlocking that understanding of him was just wonderful. And it's been a journey. I haven't got everything right. And I'm still, maybe CEO of the PDA Society. My background's charity management. I'm experienced with managing charities. I'm on a learning journey as a parent to my PDA son.
I think that taps into a really important point, is that I think as parents, we have to be able to learn to forgive ourselves for a lot of the stuff, because this isn't, it's, they say there's no handbook given at birth, but you go to a bookshop, there are literally thousands of handbooks on parenting. But when it comes to something, when it comes to the neurodivergent side of things, the fact that no two people in the world are alike, let alone two people who are neurodivergent, and, even two people who are both listed as being autistic, you're going to find dramatic differences between them, and the way that being autistic presents in day-to-day life, and the struggles it presents and the positives it presents, really importantly as well. But I obviously can really relate to that, because it's almost we didn't go for a private diagnosis because we weren't in a position to, but that whole process is just so familiar.
Mm-hmm.
And it, you know, again, it's why I ended up, you know, on the phone with the PDA Society saying, what do I do? This is, you know, what do I do next? Because that understanding, and that's what really tapped into there, is that I still find it hard because maybe because I'm neurotypical, maybe because I'm not my daughter. I'm never going to be able to be in her head. But the more that I've learned, the more I can at least come to a sympathy, if not an empathy, about what's taking place behind the scenes, and when there's a meltdown, when there's the challenging behavioural side of her, you know, being PDA. At least I can get into that, you know, understand. Right, I need to remember right now, her mind is going off. You know, it's a sea of emotions, basically. How would you react in this situation? Trying to get it. And I stuff up all the time, and that's the worst thing. And I've done videos on it where I've actually got on one where I got on straight afterwards and just said, I hate myself right now because what do I do? But I think, you know, being able to do that, forgive yourself for those moments, but move on and learn from them is so important.
And something I always do with my son, because there are days when I'm tired or I've got other stuff going on and I don't handle things well. And what I will always do is have a conversation with my son afterwards about that, and I'll acknowledge it and say, I got this wrong. And I think that's really important for him to hear that and to know, so that he knows. I'll say, you know, today my reaction was on me because these things were happening and that wasn't about you. And it's really important he knows that and can know that he's not to blame for that, for me to take ownership for that.
And I think it encourages the other way as well, doesn't it? It encourages that self-evaluation. I've seen it in my daughter. She'll often come to me. I'm similar to you. I always make a point to have a bit of a debrief after there's been any kind of an incident. I try and sit down and we just go over it and know, what could we have done differently from both sides? How could I have reacted better? What could you have done that would have made it easier? Maybe you could have, you know, when you realized you were starting to wind up, what could you have done to help that? You know, but the thing that I've noticed now is that she does come to me when she's feeling a certain way, and she will say it. And I think it's based on exactly those sort of conversations where, because we've been honest with each other through the process, I guess now it's an easier conversation to have.
It's so important, that trust, and I am constantly learning. I don't think I'm ever going to stop learning. I don't think we ever do.
The more you learn, the more you know you need to learn, I think.
Exactly. And I'm very imperfect, and you know,
oh
God, every day I'm like, you know, you learn new things and you think, right, I could have done that differently and better. Yeah, it's a journey. It's a really rich journey with my son, and we're both learning together on this. And the thing I'm learning to do is I like to be I'm quite sort of like, to feel safe in my world, I quite like to control it, be a bit bossy in it. And I've got to learn to trust him more. And he is really good when I tune in at telling me what his needs are and telling me what, you know, he can and can't do that day. And I'm getting better at trusting him. But, you know, sometimes I still want to be mum and go, you know, try and be, he's like, you say to me, you're trying to be the boss of me today. And I'm thinking, yeah, right.
Well, actually, I get that conversation. I suck at that one because it's like, you know, my body, my rules. I'm the boss here. Well, you're in my house right now. So, but yeah, it's that true. I mean, flipping that over to you, Julia, and that understanding, and, you know, you've talked about the fact that you went through this sort of process of coming to, you know, almost a born again experience, I guess, where you kind of came to understand. You wrote a book on your experiences.
I did. Well, sort of. A book was published. Didn't technically write it.
Oh, okay.
Technically, the process took about 7 years, and so it started at a conference, and I was having a chat with Ruth Fiddler, one of the sort of experts in PDA education background, and we agreed that she would help me write it because I'd been trying for a sort of few years previously on my own. So she set me sort of topics to cover, and then would email me a couple of months later and say, how have you got on? Answer being terribly. And I think in that sort of 7-year period, if you put together what I'd actually written, it would probably be about 4 A4 bits of paper of just random stuff that you could not mesh together to make a chapter. So lockdown came, and it meant obviously that Ruth wasn't as busy as normal, and I wasn't as busy as normal. So it suddenly meant, we had all this free time and nothing to do. So we thought, well, let's try a new tack with the book and write it where she would ring me up and we'd have a conversation and she would write down everything I said and then type it up into proper sentences. So that's what we did, and got the book finished. So I had a real push during lockdown. And then obviously she'd email it back to me and I would edit and say, actually, I think this point needs an exclamation mark or what, all the fine detail stuff. And it was a really good experience of a sort of a novel way of how to write a book, because Ruth has got those skills because she's published books before. It was a weird experience, and it still is, because I sometimes forget that it's public. So people will come up to me and they'll say, well, how are you managing this now? And I'm like, how do you know about that?
Yeah.
Like, how? And then I'm like, oh,
that's right. I wrote it all down.
Yeah, I put it in a book and published it. So that would be how people know, because there are now no more secrets. Everything is out there.
It must be confronting at times, but I mean, how courageous to do it at the same time.
And it was painful in places to write, but also quite good. And I've had people say to me, oh, all the trauma you suffered. And I'm like, but I didn't find it traumatic, any of it. I think I deal with trauma differently. I think rather than it depressing and affecting me negatively, I see trauma as something positive that I can learn from and grow from. And I've always experienced trauma that way as well. It's never stopped me, if you see what I mean. I've always taken it, I deal with it and I deal with upset, but I always try and channel it or use it to help somebody else and try and put a positive spin on it. But then I've always been the same, like if you get bad news or something horrible happens, there is a reason. And there will be, it's like every cloud has a silver lining, or we'll see the funny side of this at some point. And you always do. Yeah. It just might take a couple of years until whatever it is, but it will become funny. That time your child has a meltdown in a supermarket and a crowd forms isn't funny at the time, but it will be one day. When you're looking back with your child at their childhood, you'll be able to laugh about those things and embrace it and not be traumatized by it. It does happen, but different people, it takes longer.
I think people experience trauma throughout life, regardless of who they are, what neurotype they are. And that's that thing of, I think that there's that point there of how you let it affect you and how you handle it. I find that I don't know about you guys, but I find in the SEND community in general and in the neurodivergent community, but I say that with the adjacent people like myself being included, all develop a very dark sense of humor. I think it's a coping mechanism. I've heard more very, very dark jokes and laughed hard than I've ever laughed.
It's like the time I closed Gatwick Airport, right, wasn't funny at the time at all.
Coach, back up. You got it. What's this story? You closed Gatwick Airport.
We were coming back from Malta, and I was about 3, and Mum turned around at customs, and I disappeared, and she was counting children. She should have had 4, and she only had 3. So obviously Gatwick panicked and thought, "My God, she's been kidnapped!" So they closed all the doors and delayed flights until they'd found me. And the walkway bit between the terminal and the plane.
Yeah.
Well, I was in one of them trying to board another flight because I wanted to go back to Malta. So I wasn't kidnapped, and it wasn't funny at the time because Mum was in panic mode because her child had and the staff were thinking, God, we're going to make the news. In
a really bad way.
Yeah, we're going to be on the news tonight. Help! And probably their legal department were going, "Oh my God, no!" But now it's funny.
Yeah,
because it's like, who does that? Me, apparently.
Yeah.
And I wasn't worried that I couldn't see Mum or anything. I was just wanting to go back because Malta was fun.
That's amazing. I love it. So that's the other side as well. Part of the reason we started the Grumpy Dads and the Grumpy Kids and stuff was because the whole thing can be so overwhelmingly heavy, and yet there's so much light stuff that goes along with it. And yes, you're right, that at the time would have been whoa, but
hideous.
But reflect on it. I closed Gatwick Airport. I love the way you just dropped in. I like when I closed Gatwick Airport, and you were about to carry on. It was like, whoa, hang on.
Well, and because it was before children had passports, so whoever it was doing tickets assumed I was with the family in front or the family behind, so I could have made it onto the plane going wherever it was going. But luckily, because they'd stopped the flights, they'd stopped boarding. So it wouldn't have taken off anyway.
Yeah.
But they were asking people, are these your children? Yes. Is this your? No, I've not seen this child before. I've gained an extra one.
So, you've both been down this path, and you in your own individual journeys in very different ways, but you've both wound up at the PDA Society. I'll start with you, Helen. What was that process for you? How did you wind up going from being a service user to being somebody who's now running the whole thing?
Oh, yeah. I hadn't planned to. I was a director of a charity called Dravet Syndrome UK, and I was really enjoying it. We've been there 2 years. We just launched our new strategy, and very much seeing my future at that charity. But I'd started, having been supported by the PDA Society, I'd reached out to them a little while before to say, hey, I'm a charity director. Is there anything I can do to help? And offered to volunteer. And I'd been volunteering for a little while. And then they advertised internally and said, we're looking for our first CEO. Would anybody interested? And I was thinking, oh God, I really don't want to leave my current charity because it's an important time for them. But I just thought, it is such a privilege to work for a charity that's for a cause that's so close to your heart. Yeah. And I thought this opportunity won't come up again. So I need to put myself forward and see what happens. And then I was appointed, and it's been such a privilege. And there's pros and cons to working for a charity when it's a cause close to your heart, because in previous jobs, at the end of the day, at the weekend, you do, you switch off more.
I guess,
Whereas here, it's like, there is a greater risk that you sort of, take things into the evenings, into the weekends, because it is so tied to something that's so personal. But with that, I hope in turn I can bring more to this job than I could any other, because of my lived experience as someone who's been supported as a parent and someone who is still supporting my son as a PDA child.
That's magic. And I'm guessing as well, there's also the challenge there of when you're in a charity that isn't so personal, you can take almost a degree of separation from it and make very clear decisions based on it. But when you've got that extra investment, it must make some of those decisions harder, I'm guessing, in many ways.
Yeah, and I'm still learning. So, I'm still relatively new to the PDA community. It's like I was saying with my son, I'm learning, I'm going to make mistakes, the things I'm going to reflect back and think I could and should have done that differently. So I'm going into this with that learning mindset and feel very grateful for the opportunity to be involved in this role. Like yourself, the PDA Society really, really helped me at a time when I was finding it incredibly hard to connect with other people who understood our experiences, and just to have those people who did and could offer some really helpful advice was just something I'm incredibly indebted for.
Yeah.
So, and it's an exciting time for the charity. We're growing. I'm really want to do my best to support the charity, to be there for more people.
I think it is an important time, because I think PDA is becoming more, it's always been labelled as a rare form of autism. I always read that. But from my experience, the amount of people that I've touched base with, and you end up, have a look at these traits. Do they ring true? Oh, yes. And I find it's far more common than people have given credit for in the past. So I'm guessing there's a lot more interest and focus coming your way as a result of that as well.
Yeah, so I think there's one kind of small study that looked at the prevalence from the Faroe Islands that estimated about 1 in 5 autistic people may have a PDA profile. There's there's still so much we're learning and more research is needed to know about the prevalence. What we're definitely seeing is there's a greater awareness and understanding of PDA. And with that, we're finding more people are coming to the PDA Society saying, oh, you know, my clinician mentioned this, or I know another parent spoke to me about this, or myself, as I think I might be PDA. So we're getting a lot more people coming to us, which is really great that we're seeing that increased awareness and understanding. Yeah. But with that, there's so many gaps in terms of those issues of accessing a diagnosis, in terms of people being told, what do you mean PDA approaches? You know, people just assuming that there's a mould and a fit of support for all autistic people. And even though they're meant to personalise approaches, failing to do that and causing harm by using approaches for people that don't work. So there's a long way still to go. But, you know, it feels like we're on that journey of, you know, hopefully moving in the right direction.
What about for you, Julia, with your journey into the PDA Society? How did that happen for you?
Well, it started originally with a contact group, and then I started, it's about 5 years ago, fundraising, doing a yearly auction at Christmas time of handmade items, and then all the money raised goes to PDA Society. This year we're doing one in May as well, so people can look that up on Facebook.
We'll put the link in the description, so go. You'll probably find it on a card up here as well, but go into the description. There'll be a link to the Facebook auction there.
So that's where it started, and then I got asked last April if I'd like to do some training on Zoom, and I said, "Oh yes, please," you know. And then that's and the rest is history.
If people are out there and they're thinking PDA, what we'll do is I'll put a card up here now, which will show the list of traits that relate to PDA. If people are thinking this may be something that I need to address in myself or in my child or a person I care for, what should they do?
So I think, unfortunately, there are issues in terms of accessing the diagnosis. So for some people in their local area, PDA may be identified as a profile of autism. So those people may want to go and speak to their GP to ask for a referral, and that may be identified. For others, they may struggle to access that diagnosis. There are independent centres who will diagnose. We have those listed on the PDA Society website. But we know, you know, there's a barrier there to accessing those because you need to pay for them. So for some people, it may be self-identification is the only route and option. We have on our website a lot of resources to help people work through, you know, what PDA is. So those may be useful resources to look at. We did also this year as a PDA Society send every single assessment centre in the UK practice guidance for identifying and assessing a PDA profile. So if somebody is thinking about this and their clinician doesn't know about PDA, that might be a guide they might want to share with their clinicians. So have you seen this? Have a look through, see if that'd be helpful.
We'll put links to the PDA the PDA Society website in the description.
Yeah.
Put it right up here as well. But yeah, head on over there. I will say from my personal experience, when we were really first coming to tackle the idea that maybe my daughter was a PDAer, I approached the PDA Society, and the advice and the strategies that they were able to give me, and actually recommended reading and stuff like that, really, really helped. And they are a charity. It's not going to cost you to approach them. Head onto the website, make contact, and get talking with them if it's something that you feel needs to be addressed. What about for you, Julia? Do you have any recommendations you'd make for people who are on this, sort of starting this journey or on it?
For the adults, I recommend joining the numerous Facebook groups that there are. Too many to list, but there are many. And there's different ones for different types of people, if you see what I mean. There's obviously parenting ones, professional ones, there's autonomous parenting ones, there's homeschooling ones, there's adult groups where you can say anything, there's adult groups where some topics are off limits that maybe are more triggering to others. So there's a group for everyone as far as I'm concerned. It's lovely because there used to only be like one or two and that was it. And if you didn't fit those groups, then you were kind of left on your own. So it's lovely now that everyone, basically everyone I know seems to have their own Facebook group now. And it's lovely because it gives people a choice.
Yeah.
And means they're not missing out on support and friendship. So that would be my first choice to suggest for adults, along with the PDA Society website, which in the last, I don't know how long, the adult resources on there are brilliant now. For many years, adults were sort of, everything you looked up about PDA was about children. So when you're telling an adult to go and research it, it's really hard, where it's the only information, but you feel like you're failing them because it's going to refer to children at school, not adults at work. And it's really good now. The PDA Society website now is full of adult-related topics and information.
Where can people get hold of your book, Julia?
Amazon. One of my friends found it in a Waterstones bookshop, which I was like, oh, I'm actually
we'll put the
shop.
Amazon link in the description. So if anyone's interested in that, head on over. We'll put the link in there. You can go and get hold. I'm guessing it's on Kindle or as a paperback or whatever.
Yeah, Kindle or paperback.
That's great. Well, I want to thank you guys so much for taking the time. This was an important one for me, I think, obviously because, you both identify as neurodivergent yourselves, and I think that voice is so important. But the role you're doing with the PDA Society and what you're bringing to the community, I think is magic. So thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you for the invitation.
You're more
Thank
than
you.
welcome. As I say, all the links we talked about will be in the description. Do head over there. Please do go hit like and subscribe to the channel and ring the bell. It does make a huge difference to how this gets out there, as I said before. Head on over and get some merchandise. And as I said, all proceeds from the merchandise are going directly to the PDA Society. So it's a really good cause to get behind. I will see you again on the next episode. But in the meantime, please stay safe.